Why I left the nursing home. The truth. Nobody told me. You want to know why I left the nursing home? I'll tell you. Not just the what, but the truth nobody warned me about. It wasn't the food. It wasn't the nurses. It was the silence. The feeling of being forgotten while still alive. I thought I was moving into care. Instead, I found myself moving away from life. Today, I want to share 7 hard truths I wish someone had told me before I moved into a nursing home. Whether you're thinking about it for yourself or for someone you love, this isn't about blaming anyone. It's about being honest. Because the decisions we make in our 70s and 80s, they shape the rest of our days. And please, watch until the end, because truth number 7 is the one that no one ever talks about. But it changed everything for me. 1. Your independence shrinks faster than you think. At first, I was relieved. No dishes in the sink, no stairs to climb, no more worrying if I'd slipped in the shower. Everything was done for me, and for a moment, it felt like peace. But then the silence crept in. After a month, I realized something unsettling. I hadn't made a decision for myself in weeks. Not what time to get up, not when to take a walk, not even what kind of tea I wanted. I remember Margaret, 70 years old, a widow, a former school principal. For 30 years, she set her alarm for 6 a.m. every single morning, even after retirement. She liked to sit on her porch with a cup of black coffee before the world woke up. She once told me that was my sacred time, my hour of stillness before anyone needed me. But once she moved into the nursing home, there was no 6 a.m. There was 8 a.m. breakfast, then 10 a.m. group activity, then 12 p.m. lunch, followed by a scheduled nap. Every hour was spoken for. I stopped waking up early, she whispered one day, because what was the point? That hit me like a brick. We think of independence as physical, being able to drive, to walk, to cook your own meals. But true independence? It's the freedom to decide how you live. It's the ability to say, today, I want silence. Today, I want jazz and lemon tea. Today, I want to nap after dinner, not before it. Take that away, and you might still be breathing. But you're no longer living on your own terms. Advice: if you or someone you love can still manage it, consider in-home care instead of full-time residency. Even just a few hours a day of help can mean the difference between being supported and being controlled. Independence isn't all or nothing. It's a spectrum. Hold on to it for as long as you possibly can. 2. Emotional loneliness is real even when you're not alone. Margaret's story stayed with me because what she lost wasn't just her morning routine. She lost herself. And once that happens, even a room full of people can feel completely empty. Let me tell you the truth they don't print in the brochures. In a nursing home, you're never really alone. Yet somehow, you've never felt lonelier. You hear laughter down the hall, the clatter of plates in the dining room, the occasional sing-along in the common area. But when the lights dim, and you're lying in that twin bed, you realize no one has really talked to you all day. There was a man named Mr. Howard. He always wore the same navy blue cardigan every single afternoon. It was a little faded around the elbows with a small tear by the left pocket, like it had been mended once by someone who cared. He sat by the window in the East Wing every day at 3 p.m., watching the sunlight stretch across the garden wall. He never asked for anything, never interrupted, never missed that 3 o'clock appointment with the light. People passed him all the time, nurses, visitors, even other residents. They'd nod, maybe smile, but no one really stopped. One day, I did. I sat down beside him and we watched the breeze tug gently at the tree branches outside. After a minute or two, I asked, "What did you used to love, Mr. Howard?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept looking outside like the answer was floating somewhere out there in the leaves. Then he turned slowly, his eyes glistening just a little. And in a voice that had more soul than strength, he said, "Son, you're the first person to ask me that in 2 years." He told me he was once a jazz pianist, played with some of the greats, Coltrane, maybe Miles Davis once. He wasn't bragging. It was the kind of memory you don't tell to impress. You tell it to remember who you were. As he spoke, his fingers moved slightly, like they still remembered the keys. The weight, the rhythm. I sat there thinking, how could someone so full of music be left to sit in silence for 2 whole years? Not unloved, not neglected, just forgotten. That moment changed me, because Mr. Howard didn't need medicine. He needed meaning. Advice: if someone you love is in a care facility, don't just check in, connect. Show up, yes. Bring flowers, photos, even snacks. But what they really crave is a moment of being seen. Sit down beside them and ask, "What did you used to love? Tell me about the happiest day of your life. What kind of music still moves you? And if you're the one living in a care home, you still have stories to tell. Don't wait to be asked. Find someone, anyone, and say, 'Did I ever tell you about the time?' Because sometimes all it takes is one question to bring someone back to life." 3. The loss of purpose hits you hard. After that conversation with Mr. Howard, I couldn't stop thinking about how many stories were sitting in silence, just like his. It made me wonder, what happens when the world stops needing you? And then it hit me. That's what I had been feeling too. Back home, I had routines, responsibilities, rhythms, a reason to get up. Every Saturday morning, rain or shine, I'd pull on my work boots, grab my coffee in that old chipped mug, and mow the lawn. Not just mow it, stripe it. Diagonal lines, perfectly spaced, like green corduroy across the yard. My neighbors used to tease me about it. "You planning to play baseball out there?" they'd say. But I took pride in it. It was mine. I fixed things. Leaky faucets, wobbly porch steps, that old squeaky hinge on the screen door that just wouldn't quit. I had a drawer full of washers and screws and weird little pieces I kept just in case. Because I was that guy, the one who handled things. When the neighbor's fence needed painting, they knocked on my door. When someone's car wouldn't start, I was under the hood before they could even finish explaining. I wasn't famous. I wasn't rich. But I was needed. And that made me feel alive. But in the nursing home, everything changed. I wasn't Joe, the guy who fixed sinks. I was room 214, a name on a clipboard, a slot in the medication chart, another face they smiled at while checking vitals. There was no lawn to mow, no tools in a drawer, no one asking for my advice or help or opinion. I'd sit in that vinyl chair by the window and watch the hours drip by like a leaky faucet no one bothered to fix. Not because no one cared, but because no one needed me to care. You know what nobody tells you about getting older? That purpose isn't always loud. It's not about writing books or starting businesses or changing the world. Sometimes it's just being the one who gets the mail, or knowing your grandson likes his eggs a certain way, or being the person who remembers birthdays, or fixes things that aren't broken just to feel useful. But in that place, nothing was expected of me anymore. No one waited for me to wake up. No one needed me to measure mulch or hang curtains or hold the ladder steady. No one asked, "Hey, do you have time today?" And let me tell you something. When no one needs your time, time starts to feel like a burden. I went from being a man with a to-do list to a man just trying to fill time, from checking things off to just watching clocks tick. I think the moment it really hit me was over something small. Funny how the big realizations always come dressed as ordinary things. It was a Tuesday, I think. The staff was rearranging a few rooms because a new resident was coming in. Nothing major, just moving a chair and a side table from one hallway to another. I stood up. It felt good to stretch. I rolled up my sleeves and said, "Here, let me help you with that." The nurse smiled, politely but a little too quick. She put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Oh no, Mr. Joe, you just sit down. We've got it covered." I froze. Just for a second. I'd moved heavier furniture than that table in my sleep, and here I was, being gently benched. I sat back down like she asked, but my hands were still halfway to the table. That little moment stayed with me all day. Later that evening, I caught my reflection in the window. Not the kind you look into on purpose. The kind that sneaks up on you. And for the first time, I didn't see the man who used to fix fences or mow lawns or coach Little League. I saw someone who was being taken care of. Just taken care of. That night, I laid in bed and realized no one had needed me that day. Not once. Not for advice. Not for strength. Not even to open a jar. And I thought to myself, is this it now? Is this who I've become? Just someone people are careful with? That moment, quiet, unspoken, was when the weight of it settled in. Not because they were unkind, but because they were done asking me to matter. Advice. Here's what I learned. Purpose doesn't always leave you. Sometimes, you just have to go looking for it in new places. You may not be fixing the neighbor's car anymore, but there's a teenager out there who needs to hear your story. There's a single mom who would love to know how you made ends meet during the hard years. There's a young man, like I once was, who doesn't know how to hold a hammer or a promise, and you could teach him both. You can volunteer at a school and read to children who think your voice sounds like safety, or write letters, real pen and paper letters to your grandchildren. Tell them about how you fell in love, or the time you failed and what you learned from it. You can mentor someone online or record voice notes about your life, or simply sit next to someone lonelier than you and ask, "Want to hear a story?" The truth is, the world doesn't always know how much it needs you, so it's easy to feel like you've been quietly dismissed. But I'm telling you, you still have something to give. Not just knowledge, not just experience, but presence, wisdom, calm, perspective. You've made it this far. That alone is worth something. So don't wait for purpose to knock. Go out and invite it in, because purpose doesn't retire, and neither should your heart. The routine is comforting, but also numbing. I started looking for ways to feel useful again, ways to matter. But even then, something else crept in, something quieter, something harder to name. It was the sameness. Every Tuesday was meatloaf. Not bad meatloaf, just predictable. Same texture, same grayish-brown gravy, same portion, right down to the over-steamed peas sliding off the side of the plate. Every Thursday was bingo. The same plastic chips, the same red cards, the same overly enthusiastic activities coordinator calling. B11. That's B11. And someone, always the same someone, would shout, "I had that 10 minutes ago." We'd all chuckle, because that's what Thursdays were for. Wednesday afternoons. That was crafts and coloring in the rec room. A circle of folding chairs. The scent of Elmer's glue and old construction paper. Half-finished projects taped to the bulletin board. Smiling suns, autumn leaves, a paper turkey someone forgot to color in. We all pretended it was fun. But truth be told, most of us were just there for the cookies. And dessert? Oh, you could set your watch by it. Vanilla pudding on Mondays, chocolate on Wednesdays, tapioca every Friday without fail, like clockwork. A rotation so familiar we stopped tasting it. We just ate. At first, the predictability felt safe, like a ship finally finding calm waters after a long storm. After years of unexpected doctor's visits, sudden losses, and life's relentless surprises, it was comforting to know exactly what came next. But slowly, almost invisibly, that comfort became a kind of numbness. I stopped asking what day it was, not out of forgetfulness, but because it didn't matter anymore. Monday or Saturday, it made no difference. Same bed, same hallway, same voices echoing through the dining room. Nothing changed. Not the menu, not the schedule, not even the small talk. Conversations began to blur together like reruns you've seen too many times. I'd hear the same joke from the same man at the same table every single week. And I'd laugh, of course. Not because it was funny anymore, but because it was what we did. A script we kept reading from, long after we forgot why we started saying the lines in the first place. You know, there's a kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from living the same day so many times. It stops feeling like living. You don't feel forgotten. You just start feeling background, like you're still here. But the part of you that once sparkled, it's been tucked into a drawer labeled Tuesday at 3 p.m. Advice: you don't have to escape the routine to feel alive again. Sometimes all it takes is a small ripple in the water. Break the monotony. Rearrange your room. Swap your bedspread for a new color. Something bold, something joyful. Change the curtains. Put up a new photo. Light a different scented candle each week. Even tiny changes can remind your brain that time is moving, and so are you. Ask to eat by a different window, or switch lunch tables. You'd be surprised how a change in view can change your perspective. If you can, request your own playlist during quiet hours. Music from your youth. Songs that make your fingers twitch and your heart remember. Try one new thing every week. Not big things, small joys. A crossword puzzle you've never tried. A book you wouldn't normally read. Call an old friend you haven't spoken to in years. If you're a caregiver or family member, bring something new into their world. A surprise snack. A silly story. A game they've never played. Not out of obligation, but out of love that says, I still believe there are moments worth making together. Routine may keep us safe, but newness reminds us we're still becoming, still growing, still alive. So shake up the pattern, even just a little, and let your soul remember what it feels like to be awake, not just present. 5. Not everyone around you wants to be there. After a while, I started finding ways to break up the sameness. New books, little changes, a few fresh conversations, and it helped. It did. But even then, I couldn't shake the weight in the room. Not my own this time. Someone else's. I shared a room with a man named Paul. He was in his mid-80s, maybe older. It was hard to tell. He had that kind of face that looked like it had weathered storms quietly. Strong hands, but tired eyes. A man built from work and worry like so many of us. Paul didn't talk much. He'd nod in the morning, maybe mumble a polite greeting. But mostly, he kept to himself. folding and refolding the same pair of socks, staring out the small window like he was trying to remember the shape of the sky back home. Never raised his voice, never asked for anything. The kind of man who learned to live without too many needs, and forgot he was allowed to have some. But every night, like clockwork, I'd hear him cry, not sobbing, not wailing, just this low, tired weeping, the kind that doesn't shake the walls, but seeps into them. It sounded like grief that didn't have a name anymore, like someone who had run out of tears long ago, but whose heart never got the memo. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I rolled over in my bed and asked, "Hey Paul, are you okay?" He didn't answer at first, just kept staring at the ceiling like maybe the answer was written there. Then finally, in a voice so low I almost missed it, he said, "I don't belong here. My daughter, she meant well, but this isn't where I'm supposed to be." He didn't say it with anger or resentment, just resignation, like a man who had stopped fighting the current and was just letting it carry him wherever it wanted. That sentence lodged itself deep in my chest. I couldn't stop hearing it even after he'd fallen asleep. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. And I thought about how many of us end up in places not because we chose them, but because someone else thought it was best. And even when the decision comes from love, love can still hurt if it forgets to ask. From that night on, I saw Paul differently. Not just as a quiet man with tired hands, but as someone slowly unraveling under the weight of a choice he never got to make. Advice: if something inside you whispers, "This doesn't feel right," don't ignore that voice. That voice is you. The part of you that still knows what peace feels like. The part that still remembers what it's like to choose your own path. In that part, it deserves to be heard. Advocate for yourself. Ask the hard questions. Say the thing that's been sitting heavy on your heart. Not with anger, just with honesty. And if you're someone making decisions for a loved one, here's something I've learned the hard way. Love doesn't mean deciding for someone. It means deciding with them before you sign the paperwork, before you pick the place, before you convince yourself it's for their own good. Sit down and ask them, what do you want? What matters to you right now? What would help you feel alive, not just cared for? Because a nursing home might meet the needs on paper, but if it strips someone of their voice, their choice, their freedom, it can also slowly erase the very person you're trying to protect. And if you're already in a place that doesn't feel like home, don't stay silent. Even a small change can make a big difference. A different room, a new daily schedule, more time outside, or maybe the courage to start over somewhere else. You're not stuck. You're still allowed to want more. And more importantly, you're still allowed to ask for it. 6. The medical care is good, but the emotional care is thin. Don't get me wrong. The nurses were kind. They brought my medication on time, checked my blood pressure twice a day, made sure I didn't miss my insulin. But kindness is not the same as presence, and precision is not the same as care. I remember sitting in that hallway one morning, the kind with those hard vinyl chairs and squeaky tile floors, just staring through the glass at the garden. It wasn't even a beautiful garden. A few rose bushes, some patchy grass, a lonely bird bath that hadn't seen water in weeks. But I stared at it like it was a painting in a museum. Not because it was interesting, but because it was the only thing that wasn't scheduled. I hadn't smiled in days. Not a real smile. The kind that comes up from your stomach and softens your eyes. I hadn't cracked a joke or hummed a tune or asked about the weather. Not because I was sad exactly, and not because I was sick, but because I was slowly disappearing inside myself. Piece by piece, like a candle that still had wax, but no one had bothered to light it. And you know what? No one noticed. Not because they didn't care. They did. But they were too busy, checking boxes to check hearts. I got my pills on time. My blood pressure was taken every morning before breakfast. My temperature was logged. My bowel movements were cataloged. I was monitored, tracked, managed. But my soul, the part of me that used to light up when I heard my grandson's voice, the part that used to care if the sunrise was pink or gold, that part went untouched. No chart, no checklist, no scheduled intervention for the moment you stop singing to yourself in the shower. No medication round that asks, "Are you still excited to wake up in the morning?" It's not the nurse's fault. Let me be clear about that. Most of them are angels walking on tired feet. They carry more than their fair share, juggling 12 residents, medication rounds, family calls, safety checks, and mountains of notes no one ever reads. They care, but the system, it's built for efficiency, not intimacy. So what happens? You adapt. You learn to nod and say, "I'm fine," even when you're anything but. You smile during vitals, say thank you after your pills, pretend the mashed potatoes taste different today, just so the aide feels appreciated. Then you cry after visiting hours, into a pillow that smells like linen spray and resignation. You become compliant, cooperative, easy, not because you're okay, but because somewhere deep down, you've accepted that no one has time to ask how your heart is doing. And that's what hurts the most. Not the loneliness, not the silence, but the quiet, creeping belief that maybe you've become invisible. Advice: medicine can keep your heart beating, but it's being known that keeps your heart alive. That's why you need more than a chart. More than a schedule, more than a nurse who knows your name. You need someone who knows your story. Someone who looks you in the eye and says, "Tell me what's been weighing on you this week." So here's what I tell people now, wherever I go. Appoint someone to check in on your emotional health every single week. Not a nurse, not a clipboard, a person. Someone who has time to ask questions that don't have medical codes attached. That someone could be a grandchild who calls you every Sunday night, a pastor who visits just to listen, a friend from church, from the past, from down the hall, or even a caregiver who's been given permission to slow down and connect. And don't settle for shallow check-ins. You don't need, "How are you?" You need, "What's been on your mind lately?" Did anything make you laugh this week? What did you miss the most today? When did you last feel like you? And if you're a caregiver, please don't underestimate your power. One extra minute, one eye-level conversation, one moment where you listen without multitasking. That could be the very thing that saves someone from vanishing quietly inside themselves. Because emotional health isn't optional. It's not extra. It's not a luxury. It's the part of us that reminds us we're not just surviving. We're still human. Still here. Still worth reaching for. 7. You might start believing you're at the end, even if you're not. When no one asks how your heart is doing. When the days all blur into each other. When you're spoken to like a list of needs instead of a soul with dreams, something dangerous begins to happen. You don't just feel invisible. You begin to believe you're done. Not because someone told you that out loud, but because no one reminded you otherwise. This one's the hardest to talk about, because it's the one you don't even realize is happening until it already has. In the nursing home, every day starts to feel like a countdown. You stop making plans. You stop dreaming. You stop imagining next month or next year. Not because you're incapable, but because everyone else around you seems to have already decided that you've reached your final chapter. And so you start to believe it. You shrink, not just in body, but in presence. You start using smaller words. You stop starting new conversations. You become easy, quiet, cooperative, forgotten. But here's what no one tells you. Leaving changed that. Not all at once. There wasn't some big dramatic goodbye. No one clapped or handed me a medal. I just packed up my things one morning, what little I had left, and walked toward the door. I remember the nurse at the front desk looked up, surprised. She said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "No, but I'm going anyway." There was no parade, no tears, just me, and the cold air outside that somehow smelled like freedom. I didn't feel younger. My knees still ached. I still walked slow. I still needed help with groceries and stairs and complicated things like online forms. But I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Alive. Not because everything was easier, but because now, the days belonged to me again. I could decide what time to wake up, what mug to drink coffee from, whether or not I wanted silence or music. No one was handing me a schedule. No one was reminding me that pudding came at 2:15. I didn't have to be anyone's resident. I was just Joe again. And that's when I realized something that shook me to my core. I still had time. Not a lifetime. Not a guarantee. But enough. Enough for a few more choices. Enough for a few more laughs. Enough for one more new thing. And you know what? Time. Just time is the most precious thing a person can have. Not youth. That fades. Not health. That slips. Not approval. That comes and goes. Just time. And as long as you have it, even a little, you're not finished. Not broken. Not too late. Not irrelevant. Not invisible. Just unfinished. And unfinished means there's still something waiting for you out there. Advice: don't let the world decide when your story is over. Don't let paperwork, silence, or other people's best intentions write your final chapter. You're not a number. You're not a patient file. You're not a bed in a hallway or a name on a schedule. You're a story, still in motion. As long as you have breath, as long as you can feel the morning light on your skin, as long as your heart beats even once more, you're not done. So, start planning again. Tiny plans, quiet ones, brave ones. Write a letter, plant a seed, start a weekly phone call with someone who makes you laugh. Learn something new, even if it takes you twice as long. Tell someone your story before you forget it or they never ask. Make peace with your past, sure, but don't fall asleep in it. You're still writing chapters. Chapters filled with reflection, beauty, connection, silliness, second chances, and maybe, if you're willing, even joy. So, if you're sitting in a place that made you feel like your best days are behind you, take one small step forward. Call someone. Rearrange your room. Go outside and feel the sun again. Because that moment, the one where you choose life again, that's the moment everything begins to shift. You don't need a miracle. You just need to believe this. If you're still here, you're still becoming. And you have every right to live like the best part of your story hasn't happened yet. When I walked out of that place, I didn't walk out with answers. I walked out with space. Space to feel again, to plan again, to choose again. And that's the thing I want to leave with you. No matter where you are, no matter how stuck or small or invisible you feel, you still have a choice, even when it feels like you don't. So let's go over those 7 truths real quick. Not just so you remember them, but so you recognize them when they try to sneak into your own life. 1. Your independence shrinks fast. Not all at once, but in tiny ways. Until one day you realize you haven't made a single decision for yourself in weeks. 2. You can feel lonely in a crowd. Just because people are around you doesn't mean anyone's really with you. 3. Losing purpose is dangerous. When no one needs you, you start to forget who you are. 4. Routine without variation is numbing. Predictability can comfort you, or slowly erase you. 5. Some people don't belong there. They're not sick. They're just misplaced. And being surrounded by that kind of quiet sorrow can sink you too. 6. Emotional care often gets overlooked. They'll take your vitals. But will they notice when you stop smiling? 7. And worst of all, you might start thinking it's the end when it's not. You're still here, still breathing, still becoming. Those are the truths they don't put in the brochures, but they're real. And if you felt any one of them, you're not alone. What matters now is this. What will you do with the time you still have? You don't have to make huge changes. You don't have to move across the country or start a new career. Just start by saying, "I'm not done," and mean it. Now let me ask you something. Have you, or someone you love, ever thought about leaving a nursing home? Or felt that quiet tug in your chest? That maybe you're meant for something more than sitting and waiting? Maybe you've struggled with that decision. Maybe you're in the middle of it right now. If any of this hit close to home, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. And trust me, your words matter here. If this video helped you see something clearer, gave you a name for something you've been feeling, or reminded you that you're not invisible, give it a thumbs up and say, "Yes, I needed this." And if you know someone, even just one person, who might be quietly sitting in a room like the one I was in, share this with them. It might be the nudge they didn't know they were waiting for. And if you want more videos like this, more stories, more truth, more reminders that growing older doesn't mean growing forgotten, hit that subscribe button. Because this community, it's not just about aging. It's about still living.